Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's StudyTalks, Good News in Alzheimer's. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You've joined the presentation listening using your computer speaker system by default. If you would prefer to join over the telephone, just select telephone in the audio pane, and the dial information will be displayed. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenter by typing your questions into the questions pane of your control panel. You may send in your questions at any time. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. Today's slides are available for download from your handout pane of your control panel. I would now like to introduce Dr. Pierre Theriot, Director of the Banner Alzheimer's Institute and Co-Director of the Alzheimer's Prevention Initiative.
Thank you, Lori. Well, you heard who I am, Pierre Theriot. I'm an internist and geriatric psychiatrist who has spent his career dedicated to the care and study of people with or at risk for conditions like Alzheimer's disease. I'm privileged to be part of a team at the Banner Alzheimer's Institute that is pursuing a couple of lofty goals. We're trying to figure out exactly how to meet the needs of individuals and their families with or at risk for these kinds of illnesses, and we do a whole lot of research on diagnosis, treatment, and even prevention. We'll talk a little bit today about our excitement, honestly, about the fact that we're at a point in history where we think we actually have a shot at slowing down, delaying the emergence of Alzheimer's disease symptoms, or theoretically even preventing. I want to do a little bit of level setting, and the talk's going to be 30 minutes plus or minus, and we're going to have a pretty robust Q&A at the end, as Lori just mentioned. But just to remind everybody of the public health significance of Alzheimer's disease and other dementias, roughly more than half a million people affected in the United States, over 15 million people worldwide. Most people don't know that it's a leading cause of death in older people, and a very expensive illness. Not that that's the only or best measure, but hundreds of millions a year in cost now, and an estimated 1.1 trillion by 2050 in today's dollars. Pretty extraordinary public health problem. By that time, we expect that 16 or more million Americans will be affected, and it's a disease that affects not only the patient but the family as well, or other loved ones. As many as 50% of those who are supporting somebody with a dementia will develop a medical illness that they might not have otherwise, or experience a significant depression. One of the more common questions we get or when we're talking about this condition is, what's the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia, which is a fair question. Dementia is a general term, not a diagnostic term, just like pain is, or cancer. If I told you you had cancer, you'd say, well, which one and what do I do about it? It's the same here. Dementia refers to progressive loss of memory and other thinking ability, and always loss of the ability to function on a day-in, day-out basis. That's what a dementia is. Alzheimer's disease is a specific illness that is one of many that can cause the picture of dementia. It actually accounts for perhaps 2/3 or so of all people with dementia. So people tend to confuse those terms, but Alzheimer's disease is a specific illness leading to this general picture of loss of memory and thinking ability and ability to function on a day-to-day basis. The footprint of Alzheimer's disease, as we say clinically, or what we see when we interview somebody, ask them about their lives, slow onset, creeping in on little cat's feet over many months or even years. If the changes occur quickly, we're worried about some other illness. It usually starts with memory loss, not always, but usually. And then there is change in other thinking abilities such as the ability to find words, to pay attention or concentrate, to solve problems. Sometimes the eyes in the brain don't talk to each other properly. All of these thinking problems are creeping in over months to years and resulting in the impairment of the ability to function on a day-in, day-out basis, whether it's work or shopping or paying the bills or managing the household, or in more advanced instances, even the ability to take care of oneself on a day-to-day basis. And when we do a medical workup, we always have to make sure this isn't due to some other disease that could mimic it. So if I'm evaluating somebody who might have a dementia for the first time or tracking them over time, what I'm going to be looking at is, how's the memory and other thinking ability, how's the daily functioning, has there been a change in emotional or psychological state? We use the buzzword behavior. And then doctors also look for subtle changes, at least in the beginning, of neurological features. In later stages of the illness, these can include things like difficulty with balance, with swallowing, with the ability to control bowel or bladder function. So we're mapping these things over time, and here's a bad cartoon naturally drawn by me, kind of showing a schematic picture of what may happen over time to thinking ability over a period of years in somebody who's destined to develop Alzheimer's symptoms. So you see there's a period, I didn't specify the number of years here, but many, many years of normal memory and thinking ability. Then, and I just made a mistake, here we go, then a period, a kind of a gray zone called mild cognitive impairment. This is an important term that refers to gradually emerging memory and other thinking abilities that are noticeable to the person or a loved one or maybe a doctor, and objective testing shows a drop-off in performance compared to what you'd expect for age and education, but no social or occupational impairment in functioning. That's mild cognitive impairment, maybe about 10 million Americans. And then you develop the frank dementia syndrome that I just described. So we now know that there's this period of normal ability, and we now know that there can be silent changes, biological changes occurring in the brain in that time, as well as during the time when symptoms begin to emerge. This is a very important advance in our understanding of the illness. And just to point out what doctors might do with an evaluation, the most important part is how have you changed over time? When did these difficulties begin? How have they changed in the context of your work and relationship history and your educational background? Of course, need to know about all your medical problems, medications, family history. We will always do some simple testing of memory and thinking ability in the clinic, do a neurological exam, and certain laboratory tests and brain imaging tests are mandatory. And if it's important to talk about later, we can talk about some of these diagnostic tests like positron emission tomography scan. But history, physical, neurological examination, some memory testing, and some labs and imaging are mandatory to arrive at a diagnosis. We do have FDA-approved treatments now for people who have Alzheimer's dementia symptoms. They can improve memory or functional status, probably improve at least some behavioral symptoms in some individuals. And perhaps more than anything, these standard therapies can slow progression of symptoms over time. So these are important advances, but we'd like to do better, and that's where research is taking us. Now I'm going to do a little bit about biology here. So because it tees up the advances in therapeutics that I want to talk about that I think are really quite important and really what we're excited about these days. So Alzheimer's disease, as I mentioned, is a common cause of the dementia syndrome. It's a disease that damages and destroys brain cells and robs the connections between them. So here's a cartoon of a brain cell and one of the little branches on the side that we call synapses. This is a little bit complicated picture, but you can see the main changes in the brain. This is somebody after death, a brain cut open. This is just a cartoon, but you can see that the healthy brain looks, to me anyway, fairly well filled out compared to the person who died with advanced Alzheimer's. You could see the shrinkage affecting almost the whole brain. The medical term for that is atrophy. The other changes that occur are that they're what under the microscope almost look like bubblegum deposits outside of cells of abnormally processed amyloid protein, amyloid. We call those deposits plaques, not like the plaques in your teeth. And then a different protein that's deposited inside the cell, abnormally processed tau protein in ropey deposits called tangles. So just to recap very briefly, Alzheimer's disease kills brain cells, results in brain shrinkage, results in abnormal processing of a protein called amyloid with deposits outside of cells, and then a different protein is misprocessed called tau, resulting in deposits inside cells. And down below we have another picture of what the plaques look like under the brain and the tangles. Now, what's happened, and just a little bit more about amyloid, because we're going to talk a bit about that, actually in some detail. All of us have a precursor to to amyloid that straddles a cell wall. That's what this is right here, the cell wall in the brain. And in Alzheimer's disease, what happens is a pair of scissors called enzymes comes along and clips at one spot and then at another spot, and this green fragment, this little noodle here, turns out to be the troublesome protein. This is the amyloid fragment that begins to ball together in these snowballs that have a fancy medical name, but that's what they are. In this state, it appears that the amyloid is causing lots of mischief. And interestingly, these are cross-sections of animal brain slices. It's interesting to note where the amyloid deposits. It's the outer layer of the brain, the modern thinking part of the brain called the cortex, which almost guarantees that it's going to cause trouble with memory and thinking. So this amyloid pathway is much better understood now than a few years ago, and this has led to therapeutic targets that we're able to test in people. A little bit more about biology. We're going to talk about the risk factors for Alzheimer's disease. Well, first of all, if you have a brain, you're at risk for Alzheimer's disease. That's the good news and bad news. You need a brain to worry about Alzheimer's. No brain, no Alzheimer's. I'm going to talk a little bit about genetics. Now, there are very, very rare forms of Alzheimer's disease that are caused by genetic mutations. And people, if they have these genetic mutations or misspellings of the genetic code, are likely to develop symptoms in their 40s and 50s or even 30s and die in their 40s and 50s. These are rare. There may be only a few thousand people worldwide, but these are important scientifically. So these rare causative mutations affect, there are three of them that are listed here. I'll say them, but they're not that important. Presenilin 1, presenilin 2, and a mutation in the amyloid precursor protein. What's important is each of these rare mutations, if you carry it, you will die of early onset Alzheimer's disease unless you die of something else. And so will half of your children and half of their children. So it's a really scary illness, despite being so rare. One of the important things is all of these mutations cause abnormal amyloid protein processing. So it looks like, at least in this genetically determined form of Alzheimer's, that the amyloid misprocessing is a very critical element Likewise, you may or may not know that most people who have Down syndrome will develop Alzheimer's disease at a relatively young age. And the chromosomal disorder also affects the amyloid precursor protein gene, so another genetically determined amyloid dysregulation. The risk of repeating myself, these genetically determined forms of Alzheimer's disease are very uncommon, but they are very important scientifically because of the central importance of amyloid dysregulation. Now, a lot of people say, well, why are we talking about Alzheimer's disease so much? That early onset form is rare. It's really the later onset form of Alzheimer's disease, mostly affecting us in our 70s and 80s, sometimes 60s. Why are we talking about this so much? Well, one answer is that we're aging successfully, and age is one of the major risk factors for Alzheimer's disease, which we'll get to in just a minute. Here's a picture of the age dependency. The colors are not critical. They just refer to how severe the Alzheimer's dementia symptoms are, severe, moderate, mild. But from 65 to 74, about 5-8% of us will have Alzheimer's disease. In the 75 to 84-year-old range, it creeps up to about 20, and 85 and above, almost 50% of us. Okay, so this is one of the reasons we refer to the Alzheimer's problem as almost an epidemic, because we're aging so successfully. How successfully? Just to inject a note of levity in here, I won't be able to ask you directly, but just think to yourself, what was the average life expectancy in the United States when the Constitution was drafted? Guess what? 36. And half of us died by the age of 16. Extraordinary. How about what percentage of all the people on Earth who have ever lived past the age of 65 in the entire history of the world are alive today? Boink, 2/3. Extraordinary. So this is dramatic evidence of our successful aging. And then one last fun one. When Social Security was launched, what was the average U.S. life expectancy? Boink, 62. It is almost 80 now. So if you remember those numbers, that means on average, 1/3 or more of us are likely to develop Alzheimer's disease in our lifetimes. Not the only public health problem out there, but certainly a big one. One last risk slide. So for late onset Alzheimer's disease, age is the biggie, but there's also another important genetic element that's very relevant for prevention research initiatives. It's called the APOE or Apoe gene. Stands for apolipoprotein E. The last time I'll say it. It is a protein manufactured in the body that works to ferry cholesterol around in and out of cells. Now you get one of the Apoe genes, the gene that codes the production of that protein, from mom, one from dad, and there happen to be 3 versions, 3 flavors, 2, 3, and 4. Don't ask me what happened to one. And the issue is that if you carry 1 or 2 copies of the E4 version, called an allele, your risk of Alzheimer's disease goes up. How much? If you carry 1 copy of the gene, maybe a 4+ fold increase. If you carry 2 copies of the gene, as much as a 35-fold increase. So if you carry 1 or 2 copies of this E4 version of Apoe, your risk of getting Alzheimer's disease late in life goes up very sharply with 2 copies of the gene, but also with 1 copy of the gene. It's important to know that this ApoE2 version actually decreases risk, as does an incredibly rare mutation discovered in Iceland that blocks bad amyloid production. So another genetic amyloid connection that's important. So most late onset Alzheimer's disease we think is due to age, Apoe genotype, And then there's mounting evidence that lifestyle and environmental risk factors may also play a role. It's pretty interesting stuff that I've summarized a little too simply here. You can't bank on all these things, but there's good and mounting evidence that your lifestyle and certain environmental factors may increase or reduce your risk of getting Alzheimer's disease later on. And what you see in the slide, which I won't read, is that in general, a heart-healthy lifestyle looks to be a brain-healthy lifestyle. So if you exercise, have a healthy diet without lots of animal fats, high in fish and vegetable oils, not too many refined carbs, white flour products. A good example of this is the so-called Mediterranean diet. Looks like that kind of diet may be associated with reduced risk of developing dementia later in life. And controlling your risk factors for heart disease, blood pressure, cholesterol, diabetes, smoking, all of those can affect risk too. So these are important, but of course, even those of us who may live a remarkably heart-healthy lifestyle could still develop Alzheimer's disease. But this looks to be an important variable. Before I turn to the actual studies that are going on, I want to also mention that we have a remarkable array of tools to measure the presence or absence of the disease and its progression over time and response to treatment. So where the rubber meets the road is memory and thinking ability, but we now can measure fluids like blood and spinal fluid that bathes the brain and spinal cord. We can measure those bad proteins and other chemicals in spinal fluid. We can look at those bad proteins with positron emission tomography scans. We can see amyloid deposits that are kind of shown here. And more recently, we have the ability to see these tau proteins. We can look at how the brain is using its fuel, which is sugar. We see characteristic patterns of reduced sugar use in the brain with this type of scan. We can look at structure and volume of the brain with magnetic resonance imaging scans. And as I've told you already, all of this in the context of your genetic profile, incredibly important. These are wonderfully sensitive tools that allow us to detect and track the progression of the illness, and Alzheimer's disease, and also measure response to treatment. So thanks to the smart guys in all the laboratories around the world who've been studying this disease for 20, 30 years, we have promising new agents coming out that that hold the hope of improving symptoms or slowing down symptom loss using chemical messenger-based therapies, which are like the medicines we have now. There are new drugs that are designed to block the damage to the cell, call them anti-rest drugs. We have drugs and what we call biological agents, immunotherapies, to modulate or modify this amyloid pathway, and similarly for the tau pathway, the tau protein pathway. I'm going to talk about the amyloid protein medications and biological agents because that's where most of the action is right now. Probably half of or so of the emerging Alzheimer's therapies that are advanced in clinical trials are with these agents. So why are we talking about prevention clinical trials now? Well, obviously, I told you there's an incredibly important need. This is a devastating, unacceptable illness. We have to do something to put it behind us. Number two, we now know that there is what we call a silent preclinical, before symptoms emerge, stage of Alzheimer's. No symptoms, but we know that damage is occurring. We know that these proteins are accumulating. We've shown that. Number three, we have these plausible experimental therapies that are known to interact and interfere with this biological process that's going wrong. I just showed you that we have the right measures of biomarkers and memory and thinking tests to detect and track Alzheimer's disease as it unfolds and as it hopefully responds to treatment. And lastly, and a very important theme of the treatment research that's been done, is it looks more and more likely that earlier treatment may slow the progression of Alzheimer's disease, the underlying biology. So you put all these together, and that leads to the conclusion, okay, let's start prevention clinical trials now. Well, in whom? And in general, our answer in this group called the Alzheimer's Prevention Initiative is to say, let's study people who are at the highest risk of developing symptoms of Alzheimer's disease soon. For instance, people at an older age, people at the elevated genetic risk that I described to you, and perhaps people who have biomarker evidence. That means a test that looks at a scan or the blood or spinal fluid and finding these bad proteins. And the most common positive biomarker finding is amyloid deposits in the brain on this scan called positron emission tomography, or PET scan. What is a clinical trial, by the way? Well, it's a study to find out if an experimental treatment is safe, well tolerated, and shows the benefit we hope for. In the case of preclinical trials, as we call them, the hope is that we can delay the onset of or even prevent emergence of the symptoms of Alzheimer's. That's the benefit. And of course, we have to study whether there are bad things that happen, so we have to weigh risks as well as benefits. In all ethically and rigorously designed studies, is placebo given versus the actual treatment. Placebo is like salt water if it's an injection, or a sugar pill if it's a pill. And the treatment, the active treatment versus the placebo treatment, is given in what we call a double-blind fashion, meaning neither we nor our volunteers or their families know who's getting which treatment until the whole study is over, allowing what we hope is an unbalanced assessment of whether there's any impact on the illness progression. And it's worth your noting that any study that is conducted in humans must be approved by very rigorous review by government agencies, as well as independent ethics committees that look over our shoulders and say, this is good science, or in fact, we don't think this is good science and it shouldn't be done. Only studies that are approved go forward. So where are we at with the Alzheimer's Prevention Initiative? I hope I've teed up the idea in your mind that one logical group to look at is cognitively unimpaired people who are at very elevated risk of developing symptoms of Alzheimer's disease because they carry these early onset genetic mutations. We sometimes call those autosomal dominant, meaning that gets passed down to every generation, and if you have the mutation, you will get the symptoms if you don't die young. By a stroke of fate, it turns out that a very large number of people who carry these rare mutations are in and around the city of Medellin, Colombia. And we have worked out a remarkable partnership with the scientists in Colombia and the families down there. So we are interacting with thousands of people who come from these families. And we are conducting a trial right now in South America in people with normal and memory thinking ability as young as age 30 who are receiving an immunotherapy versus its placebo in an effort to see whether we can stave off the emergence of Alzheimer's symptoms. Wish us luck. Wish the families luck. And they also, by the way, if they're on the phone, they're saying they're doing this for you in part. The study began in 2013 and is going well. We won't get answers for several years. More recently, we're just now getting off the ground the second Alzheimer's Prevention Initiative study in older people, and I'll describe that more in a minute, who are cognitively unimpaired but at very elevated risk for getting Alzheimer's disease because they carry 2 copies of that ApoE4 gene. And I want to tell you a bit more about that study, which is enrolling volunteers now. So let me just recap the highlights. It's a study in people who have no symptoms yet, so we call it preclinical Alzheimer's disease, but because they're between ages 60 and 75 and they carry 2 copies of that Apoe gene, are at particularly elevated risk of developing Alzheimer's symptoms soon. People need to meet those criteria. They need to be in generally good health. Obviously, if you have a cancer or congestive heart failure that makes it hard to walk, it wouldn't be a good idea to be in a study. This study, called the Generation Study, because we're asking for a generation of people now to help us try to find a way to end Alzheimer's, is sponsored by Novartis Pharmaceuticals in collaboration with us at the Banner Alzheimer's Institute. We were fortunate to obtain a very large grant from our government agency called the National Institute on Aging. And the company called Amgen has partnered with us in this effort, as have several philanthropic organizations. So this is a remarkable public-private partnership trying to do something really unprecedented. What we're doing in this study is, in this trial, is studying not 1 but 2 different types of treatment to try to stave off Alzheimer's disease. One is an active immunotherapy. That means a shot that stimulates the body's own immune system to generate what are called antibodies that have the possibility of fighting off Alzheimer's disease. So we are studying an active immunotherapy versus a placebo shot. Shots are given about every 3 months. We are also studying an oral medication that has a funny name called BACE inhibitor. In a nutshell, what this does is block the production of the bad amyloid. So 2 different anti-amyloid therapies being studied within 1 trial. People who enroll are treated for 5 to 8 years with either one of these agents. Remember, it's double-blind and placebo-controlled. Over 1,300 people will be enrolled. The primary outcome that we're looking at is, do we slow down the otherwise likely emergence of memory and thinking difficulties? Do we delay the time until somebody develops frank symptoms like mild cognitive impairment? And we, of course, are going to be looking at a whole bunch of other thinking measures and biomarkers. For people to enroll in this study, they will need to have the Apoe genetic test done, and they need to know the results, and they need to agree to be followed by telephone on and off for a year to see what it was like to learn that genetic information. As you see, this study is enrolling in North America, Europe, and Australia. And for those of you who like to surf the web, there's more information about it on the FDA website, Food and Drug Administration website listed here. So enrollment into the study, for those who are interested, occurs in 2 stages, each with its own informed consent. The first part is saying, okay, here's this study. Are you generally available? Do you want to know your Apoe genetic status? Is it appropriate for you to learn that? And if all of those are yes, then the disclosure occurs with structured genetic counseling for everyone. And then people get phone calls intermittently for a year to check how they're doing, having heard this information. Part 2, the consent, final screening, and then if everything is a go, the person remains eligible and interested, the treatment and follow-up begin. And just a reminder, this is people who carry 2 copies of this Apoe gene. How does the genetic testing occur? Well, it's unusual for people to know their Apoe gene testing results, although some people do know, and they can contact our Alzheimer's Prevention Registry staff directly. Most of us don't know this information, so we have a program called Gene Match, which I'll describe in a minute, that does in-home genetic testing and for this gene, and the organizers of this process, which include us at Banner Alzheimer's Institute, we invite people who have no copy, one copy, and two copies of the E4 type gene to part one of the study to learn about the results. So some people will come into a research site, a generation study research site, knowing that they might have no copies, they may have one copy, they might have two copies, but they know that if they get a call, it doesn't mean that they necessarily have two copies. However, only the people with two copies are eligible to proceed to Part 2. The Gene Match program. This is a remarkable program under the umbrella of the Alzheimer's Prevention Registry, and we're asking that if you want to help us implement the generation study, one thing you could definitely do is sign up for Gene Match. And I have done it myself, so I know what it's like. You look at an online information session. You sign an online consent. You're mailed a cheek swab kit, looks like a little bit a Q-tip. Swab the inside of the cheek, let it dry out, mail it back. A laboratory does the tests. You will never learn the results of your ApoE test from Gene Match. You will be referred to studies partially on the basis of your ApoE test, and you would learn your genotype only if that study required it. Now, let me just say a little bit more about that. Why don't we do ApoE testing on everybody? Because the results right now don't tell you whether you'll get Alzheimer's disease, if so, when, if so, what to do about it. But the what to do about it's different now. For people who want to help study treatments to try to stave off Alzheimer's disease, one study is enrolling people who have two copies of the gene. That means there's something they could do or not do, but they have that option. And just want to stress one more time, because it's a big deal, if you receive an invitation to the generation study after going through Gene Match, it does not necessarily mean that you have two copies of the ApoE gene. Almost done here. So those who wish to respond to this call to action, consider signing up for Gene Match. You've got to be between 50 and 75. You have to live in the United States. And you have to report that you do not have a diagnosis of dementia or other significant cognitive impairment syndrome. Here is the link to the Gene Match program, endallsnow.org/GeneMatch. Even I could do it, and I'm not the swiftest internet savvy guy in the world. And as I close, I just want to, that's the call to action, that's the story. We are looking for people around the world, but right now focusing in this talk on the United States. We want to acknowledge the extraordinary support we've gotten from our federal government, from our partners in the pharmaceutical industry, from philanthropic foundations in the United States and in South America. Even the state of Arizona has chipped in. We're incredibly grateful to hundreds of scientists around the world, and most of all to our valued research participants. We will now I'll turn this back to Lori for the Q&A session, and thank you very, very much for your attention to this topic, which is, of course, near and dear to our hearts in the Alzheimer's research community. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Theriot. We're now going to begin answering the questions submitted during today's presentation. As a reminder, you can still submit questions through the questions pane of your attendee control panel. All right, so our first question, I'm interested in participating in a clinical trial. I sent in a swab to the Banner Institute. How are participants accepted in the trials? My mother spent many years slowly losing all her abilities we take for granted.
Okay, well, I'm sorry to hear about your mom, and thank you for stepping up. We are asking people to step up, and we are at a time in the scientific, in this era of scientific progress where we are ready to answer incredibly important questions. So you and I have both done the cheek swab. That goes to a laboratory that in secret does the Apoe genetic test and nothing else, and then the sample is destroyed. That information about your genotype and mine are kept in a secret electronic file, and a statistical program matches people who have given their genetic information to studies based in part on the genetic information and based in part on other things like age, for instance, or location. And when a study becomes a good match, you would be contacted and given information about study X, Y, or Z, and you could decide whether you want to pursue that opportunity and be put in contact with the research site near you that's doing it. So in the case of the generation study, let's pretend you live in Tempe, Arizona, just outside of Phoenix. You would be told you may be eligible for the generation study. You may not be, but you might be. We who are contacting you don't know your swab results, but you might have 0, 1, or 2 copies of the Apoe E4 gene. The generation study is being conducted in Phoenix, and if you'd like to go visit the site and hear more about the details of the study and decide whether you want to proceed, you would be put in contact with that site. Long answer to a good question.
Thank you. Our next question is, what if you want your results from GenMatch?
That's a great question. We cannot do that for a variety of reasons. The GenMatch program is under the purview of one of these independent ethics committees that I told you about before. They agree with the general view in the field that people should not just casually learn their Apoe gene test results and should only learn it in the context of certified professional counseling. Number one. Number two, as you can imagine, we're inviting thousands and thousands of people to do this. This is a philanthropically supported effort, and it would be totally impractical for us to provide this kind of genetic counseling in the way that's considered necessary and best practice. Number three, we're conforming with what is considered best medical practice now. Right now, unless you're going to take action on the basis of your genetic information, it doesn't tell you whether you're going to get symptoms, when, or what to do about it. The only answer to the answer to the what to do about it is only different right now if you elect to participate in a clinical trial on the basis of your genotype. Now, if I could meander forward, I'm hoping somebody has already asked the question, by the way, why are you studying the impact of genetic disclosure with telephone follow-up for a year in people who've learned that they have no copy, 1 copy, and 2 copies of this E4 gene? What's up with that? The answer is so obvious that it's profound. What if we're lucky enough, all of us are lucky enough, that one of these treatments that we're studying in the generation study works? That would be extraordinary. Works and was well tolerated. It's a big if. Well, if that's true, we are then looking at a world in which any adult who wishes to know his or her genetic risk for Alzheimer's disease might wish to get tested and learn the results, so that he or she could make a decision about whether to get a preclinical therapy. Well, we need to know how to provide that information should that future come. So we are preparing for that now. The GenMatch, I hope I've conveyed to you how extraordinary the Gene Match program is, how forward-looking it is, how almost revolutionary it is. But one thing we cannot do through Gene Match is give you the answer that I can imagine some of you would like to know from Gene Match. Cannot do that.
We have a question regarding the cost of Gene Match.
The Gene Match program is supported by several philanthropic organizations and with public funding, and is conducted at no cost to individuals. It obviously does cost a considerable amount of money, but no individual is charged for it. Likewise, I should just have mentioned, in case it's not clear, that for those who weigh the pros and cons of being in a clinical trial and decide to participate, likewise there are no costs to the individual associated with that. The Generation study, for instance, is supported by NIH funding, philanthropy, and support from our industry partners.
Well, thank you. Our next question, bear with me, it's a little long. I am 57 years old and have 2 copies of the Apoe gene. My maternal grandmother, my maternal aunt, and my mother all died from Alzheimer's. I'd love to participate in the Generation study, but I'm 3 years younger than the required minimum age. Are there any exceptions to this requirement?
First of all, I'm sorry about your grandma and your aunt on your mom's side. It's a very, very tough journey for them and the family, I'm sure. The Generation study is strictly limited to people who are between the ages of 60 to 75, inclusive, at the time that they sign up for the study. So the answer is no for now. Hopefully you are part of the Alzheimer's Prevention Registry and will get regular updates about studies as they become available. These studies that come up could include a variety of things. There are so-called natural history studies going on in various parts of the United States looking at people with and without this APOE risk and studying how they change or don't change over time from a thinking perspective and from a biomarker perspective. There are sometimes surveys about what people think and how they feel and how they're planning their lives. These are actually important surveys that are going on. And I will also say that the Alzheimer's Prevention Initiative has stated publicly on numerous occasions that although we're doing 2 trials as of now, there will be multiple Alzheimer's Prevention Initiative trials over time. So keep those in mind. And then there are the registry will tell you about other prevention trials as they become available. So hang in there, look at the options as they crop up. Here's a good news, bad news thought. I hope that our enrollment doesn't take 3 years for the Generation trial, but if it does, that could be an option down the road. So good luck with your journey.
Thank you. Our next question is, given that positive advances in research and technology increases over time and increase at an potentially accelerating pace, could you guesstimate how long it will take to arrive at effective therapies or a cure?
Oh boy, great question, tough question. We tend not to use the word cure at the Banner Alzheimer's Institute. It's a word that conveys so much sort of mastery over the illness that we stamp it out. We think that that's a very, very lofty goal. Most of us in the Alzheimer's research community have the guardedly optimistic view that there are so many emerging therapies, such rapid advance in the understanding of the biology of the illness, better and better ways of tracking the illness and treatment effects. We think that if we can conduct sufficient number of these trials, we can find something that is going to make a big difference within the next generation. And that's actually part of the mission of the Banner Alzheimer's Institute, finding an end to Alzheimer's disease without losing another generation. What we mean by that is having one of these shots on goal really score, really work. Don't bank on that, but there's reason to have that hope and that goal.
All right, thank you. Our next question, I'm interested in generation study and submitted my swab. Do I just need to wait to get contacted, or is there another outreach that I need to do?
You can wait, which I know sounds odd. What's going on in the background, invisible to you and to virtually everybody else, is a complex statistical program that matches people who are in the right age range, in the right geographic location, so that they're near a generation study site, and there are more and more of these coming on board all the time, and the right genotype, which includes, by the way, 2 copies, 1 copy, and no copies of the gene. So it may feel a little strange to hear me say, well, you'll get called if there's a possible match, but or you get contacted anyway, but that's the reality. If you have questions, you can always contact our registry staff online, and we will do our best to answer them.
All right, thank you. Our next question, I'm 53 years old. My mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's at age 70. Should I get the APOE test immediately? I'm sorry, APOE test immediately?
So again, I'm sorry about your mom. I'm gonna. The question is, should the caller, the questioner, given this family history of onset of symptoms in mom about age 70, should I get the APOE test done immediately? When I answer it, I'm going to give you the answer that's considered best medical practice right now based on the evidence we have. No. Just at the risk of repeating myself, if you knew your APOE4 gene profile, you wouldn't know whether you're going to get Alzheimer's, when, or what to do about it. We think that the primary reason for people to learn their APOE4 results is research participation. So you could sign up for GeneMatch. I actually don't remember the age. If you're below 55, you can't sign up for GeneMatch. You could. There may be studies out there at various medical centers studying families such as yours, and you might be eligible for one of those studies. As far as GeneMatch goes, you'd have to wait until you hit 55. Now, I can imagine that there are seekers out there, people who say, I really, really want to know my APOE4 genotype. Despite all the cautionary notes that I've sounded, if you find yourself in that category, what I would suggest is you have that discussion with your doctor and talk about the pros and cons, and talk about the ways to get the testing done. It's actually not that easy to do, even if you pay out of pocket, which is typically a few $100s. And then I would strongly urge that people not get that information outside the context of genetic counseling.
All right, thank you. Next question. If one is accepted for the trial study, is there any problems with the geographical location?
A great question. This is a global study, and I must tell you, as a member of the so-called sponsor team, the group of people mounting that study, it's a big deal to launch a study globally and be sure that it's done exactly right at exactly every research facility. So we have a little less than a couple of dozen sites up and running in the United States. There will be 40 or more roughly by the end of the year. So you can get information about where those sites are through our website. There is also a Generation Study website, but it primarily refers you to GeneMatch if you're interested. Also, if you're keenly interested, really, very motivated, there is the possibility of the study sponsors paying for travel for a site if it's not in driving distance. So that is a consideration.
All right, thank you. We have another question. I am E3, but my maternal grandmother, mother, and aunt all had Alzheimer's. What does this mean for risk?
That's a great and tough question. People who have the 3-3 profile are considered at genetically neutral risk in terms of this Apoe story. That doesn't mean such a person would never get the disease. I didn't get into it, but people who have a family history, irregardless of their Apoe status, are at elevated risk. So let's just say if my dad had Alzheimer's disease, and I'm chatting with my neighbor, and neither his parents nor any of his siblings had Alzheimer's disease, not knowing anything else, my risk would be about 3- to 4-fold greater than his of getting Alzheimer's disease at some point in my life. That's not certain, but it is elevated risk. So what that says to us is there's probably some other genetic factor that can increase risk other than the ApoE4 gene. So that has yet to be discovered, but it's probably lurking in there. That said, compared to the ApoE4 gene, whatever else is lurking out there doesn't have nearly the impact that ApoE4 does. So it's largely good news for the questioner, but there is this slightly increased risk. P.S., at the risk of repeating myself, remember that age is a profound risk factor for any of us, regardless of genotype. So age well is my final answer.
I think we have time for one more question. What is the email to receive the genetic swab?
If I can go back, let's see. It's right here. I'll let it linger for a minute. endallsnow.org/GeneMatch.
All right. Well, you leave it on here. I'm going to go ahead and close. Thank you, Dr. Tariot, and thank you, everyone, for attending today's StudyTalks. We will answer questions not answered via email, and any additional questions can be sent to info@nalznow.org. Once you leave today's webinar, you will receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with the link to view a recording of today's webinar. On behalf of the Alzheimer's Prevention Registry, thank you for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.